welcome to, well, a comment response video, and I'm not sure when this one will go up because I've been having fun with things. So let's refresh this and make sure it goes back to the right point. And we're starting off where we finished last time, which was with the question from Wayne's World of Science and Technology on the what if the Royal Navy went 4.7 inch rather than 4.5 inch for dual purpose. And I will say, I've started and I'm going to finish the Christmas videos as aggregate comment response videos. But I have heard your comments, and I am going to, in future, try and stick to one video, one comment response video. But I do say this as a note. That's going to make it a lot of videos, and I am planning on. Well, I've fleshed out and started the writing, and the books are going to go into high gear writing next month. So probably the sheer number of videos are going to drop down in terms of comment response videos. I might do slightly more shorts because they're monetized from the beginning of February, and I've got a whole batch which I didn't put up in January because honestly I got busy doing other things, and I thought, well, I'll save it for February now. I've got to the last week of January. I might as well save it for February when they start monetizing them and stick them up and see what effect that has on the monetization. Just see. Just as an experimentation. Now, Wayne's World of Science and Technology's question or comment was, the idea of an Abdeel chasing a conditori put a big smile on my face. I could see tribals replacing the JK designs or them being slightly enlarged tribals to take a second torpedo launcher. Thanks, Alice. Great explanation of how it could have played out. As a forward project, imagine the look of horror on the engineers' faces if they'd been ordered to produce a 4.7 inch 90 degree. The power gear would be a treat. It's not the power gear that would be the problem, it's the recoil and also the loading. Well, you'd have to load in a lower position anyway, you would have to do it with the high angles anyway. But, yeah, it's the sheer where the force is going to do, how the force would strain the mount, and the damage you do to the mount with the recoil coming straight down in terms of a ship mount, especially if you've got a mount which isn't. I suppose wait. If you're designing a mount which is just a high angle mount, so it will only go from 45 degrees to 90 degrees, you can do that. If you're designing one which is supposed to go from -5 degrees, so let's say here, all the way up to 90 degrees, then designing the shocking and the various systems to take that damage is going to be pretty darn heavy, because the directions and the positions of the forces that can affect the mount are going to be, well, variant. They can be from here, which will try and lift the mount up, to here, which will try and push the mount into the deck, to various other ones along the way. So that's not the power gear. That's the whole mount design would have to be pretty heavy duty, and you would honestly be asked by the designer, what are you gaining for those extra 5 degrees? How much for the amount of effort and amount of weight we're putting into this mount? How much are we gaining for those extra 5 degrees? Is it enough to warrant it? And the odds are no. Because for that amount of weight, if you think about it, and this is rough calculations I've done using my dad's actually old book and looking at it, but the rough calculations made by a historian reading a book which was written by a naval architect, not my dad, but was one of my dad's favourite naval architect and mathematics books, and trying to approximate it through there and working it out roughly, because no one actually did this. I think the mount in weight would increase by up to 50% to deal with the amount of bracing and the amount of shock absorption it would have to take. And minimum is about 30%. So let's go with a minimum increase. If you consider that, you can have one which would do up to 85, and you can have 4 of those on a ship, for the same weight as you could have 3 which could do up to 90. Which is more useful? So that's why they didn't do that. As another full project, imagine a 4.7 and 4.5 put in a triple mount, but being ready for installation 1956. Caramba. Again, we have a triple mount we have a triple 4-inch. That's put on several ships at the end of World War One, and it's found to be not that helpful. The reason they're found not to be that helpful is because, again, you get theoretically extra firepower. You also get an extra load of extra complication. If you think about a triple 6-inch turret and a triple 8-inch turret, they are big spaces. They are big guns, and they are basically their 3 individual guns. When you're dealing with the amount of space you're going to allocate to a secondary mount, or have a space on the destroyer, you aren't going to be able to give them basically 3 individual guns. They are going to be a very, very tight combined space. Think about that, and that's the trouble with the triple mount. Basically, theoretically, you got a high rate of fire. In practice, the people got in the way of each other. That's why the British went back to twin mounts, because people were getting in the way of each other. Once it's 6-inch, you can justify space to give them the decent space to do a triple mount. It's those little things. They have a factor. For the Germans, the best choice would have been a modification of the 5-inch destroyer gun. Same with the French, Italians, and Japanese. Since they'd all decided to use the maximum allowable gun size on destroyers, I don't know the technical specs well enough to comment further on which variant would be best for each. You're pretty much on the right line. My apologies for the way the question was worded. I was not specific enough and left you guessing. Between when I read the book on the interwar destroyer design and now is nearly a year. Yeah, that's fun. Luckily, I based it on the earlier talks on UK naval infrastructure as well as Brown's book, and you knew exactly what I meant and where to go. As I do try and remind people sometimes, this is a naval history channel. I am a naval historian. It has caused shock. I am still getting various comments and direct messages about the alternative Schlieffen plan I came up with to avoid going through Belgium. And the amount of people are going, well, this very complicated land warfare suggestion, or this, that, the other, or they want me to rewrite the plan, or they think I should be trying to build a tunnel through. One of them actually was a tunnel, build a tunnel underneath the French border and come up from that. And I'm sort of going, you've now found possibly what might be the one more complicated and difficult task to do than actually doing the amphibious operation. Building a tunnel long enough, deep enough, and big enough you can get an army through it underneath the German border, and trying to do it secretly. I mean, theoretically, you could set up a mine and have it done, but trying to keep that secret just boggles the mind. But the whole point is, really, I thought about the Schlieffen plan, the question was that it shows in the end why the Germans had sort of boxed themselves in with their earlier successes. The fact is, the French had built the fortifications. And yes, they're having to go through Belgium. And really, people then sort of said, well, the amphibious operation is not an operation, it's not viable. Well, there was doctrine, there were things around. But what its reality was, it wasn't viable the moment you made an enemy of Britain. Because if you think about it, during the Franco-Prussian War, Britain was Germany's ally. And that basically meant the French Navy was constantly at a disadvantage. And that's why the small Prussian Navy managed to basically beat up the French Navy. By the time you get to 1914, the world has changed. Which has led to some interesting comments on those videos, and I think I've done a comment response video to that video. But that's the big change. And there is also some people who go, well, you know, it's the rising German economic power that makes war with Britain inevitable. It doesn't. There are multiple rising economic powers. Britain doesn't flinch in America. They're not looking for war with them. They're not looking for war with pretty much anyone else. Russia, because they keep being expansionist, they're a problem, but, you know, they'll deal with it. Japan is a rising economic power, which theoretically is a threat to our influence in China. Don't they ally with them, Germany builds a fleet. And it builds a fleet focused on, well, let's be honest, the risk fleet strategy was supposed to beat Britain without fighting Britain by presenting a fleet so powerful that Britain couldn't risk war with them. That basically says from the get-go, you've admitted you can't build a fleet big enough to actually beat the British. You won't get the money, you won't get the funding, because you're building a fleet its purpose is that you will take out enough of the British. You will lose, but you'll take out enough British that someone else can beat them. That's a problem there. And secondly, that's overwhelmingly going to mean the British look, you go, well, that kind of colours everything you're doing. From this point onwards, you have to be looked at as someone who's trying to undermine the British position. Sort of, and final part of Wayne's World of Science Technologies comment, saw the comment on taking the 4-inch guns and sticking them on tanks. Can you imagine Matilda 2 with a large turret to take a 4-inch gun? The knock-on effects of design. Tank design could have been successfully drastic, so at least. The Matilda 2 would probably have had to be a lot bigger, because remember, the Matilda's designed around a 40mm. So if it was designed around a 4-inch, that's a much bigger gun. And it's probably going to be a slightly bigger Matilda. Quite a bit bigger. But also, there would then be a scenario. It would probably be a Crusader tank, which would be built around the around the 4-inch, not the Matilda. Matilda was the infantry support tank. So probably it'd be one of the cruiser, i.e. the Crusader, or one of the other cruiser tanks built around it. But yeah, that would cause an interesting thing if that had been around at the beginning of World War II, because that gun would have probably wiped out pretty much anything attacking it. In a case of, hello, Lord, we are loading 4-inch high explosive. Why? Because if we use the armour piercing, it goes straight through the opponent. There is no tank around which will actually set off a 4-inch armour piercing. We have 4-inch armour piercing? Yes, we do. Disturbingly enough. Right. Comment on Force Z's fate. Brits would have lost without America. Simon S. Brits would have probably lost without Canada and Australia, yes. By the time America enters the war, it's sort of stabilised, and long term, I think, especially with the invasion of Russia and the British Empire resources, it's unlikely for Germany to win. So whether I doubt it would be the same victory. I think it would have been longer, harder, and nastier, and would have caused a lot more damage. As for the Pacific, as I've said before, if Japan had just attacked France and Britain and hadn't attacked America as well, had avoided the Philippines, the Americans couldn't have afforded not to get involved, because the Japanese could have been left with a significantly strong enough position in the Far East that could have changed the scenario for the Americans. It could have done. Remember, the big strategic weakness for the Japanese is their access to resources, their access to infrastructure. Those things, a war of conquest might give them more resources, certainly, which might allow them to enhance their infrastructure. But secondly, and this is the other point I was made, there's also the potential, it's an outsized one, but there is a potential, and the Americans have to consider this, that if the Japanese attack Britain and Britain during this scenario, and Britain somehow wins, thanks to the whole vast resources of the Empire, so mobilizes not just the Indian Army, but also the full resources it can mobilize in Africa, mobilizes all the resources it can get out, manages to somehow keep going, which considering the Japanese peter out on the logistics trail in Burma, and that's one of the things that holds them up, and they sort of one of the reasons why they don't invade Australia, etc., is because their logistics trail is completely out, pretty much. It's not an impossible scenario to go through, because Britain had a lot of defence in depth to get through. It would not have been easy, it would not have been quick, but then you could have had a very different British Empire emerge from World War II. It would probably at some point have to be forged into far more of a federation than an empire to make it work. So you might be dealing with a very different a very different nation or framework. And for the Americans, their isolationism would have cost them the moral superiority which they had at that point managed to maintain after World War One, which gave them a bit of a high ground. And they will be dealing with a very, very much industrialized, probably Africa, Canada, more industrialized than it was. Australia would have had to, all sorts of things would have had to have happened. And again, it's not a good scenario for America under those circumstances, because you have a Britain which has just been through a major war, has fought everyone, is now in a dominant position in the Far East, because it's whatever this British Confederation, Federation, whatever it is, thing that comes out of it, would be the dominant partner in the dominant power in the Far East, would be the dominant power in the Middle East, would be the dominant power everywhere in the world, and suddenly America's got to deal with that. Which is fine, because it'll be a democracy. I doubt it'll be dictator Churchill. But America won't be in the position it gets of economic primacy, etc., post World War II. I need to really wargame it to work it through, but it would be not that simple. And I'm not saying this because I'm massively patriotic or anything like that. There is a scenario where the Brits do lose, trust me. But the Brits, you have to remember just how big and vast the resources of the British Empire are. And that's one of the reasons which is often sort of forgotten, and it's quite difficult to work out in the aggregate. Because people sometimes go, we're comparing the German economy to the British economy, and the Germany's economically stronger and they're producing this. And you go, yes, that's true, but the British Empire is massive. And the Flower Class are a good example of this. The sheer places they are being built. And there is scope to expand their construction. The British are considering expanding their construction. And if they had been faced with that scenario, you would probably have dealt with, and I can see this happening, as the yards which have been building Flower Class in Canada and Britain, etc., get more experience. They would get asked to build frigates or castle class, depending on their size requirements, and the Flower Class building model will be moved to India, South Africa, those places which haven't had much large building experience yet, and it would have just kept going. So it would have been a very grinding war, probably talking about a war which would last a decade, which would not be good. We might well see nuclear weapons used. Again, the British were doing fairly well in their own developments on those fronts. It was far better when the British and the American systems were combined together to create and the Americans were able to build it. But the thing is, that was British and American technology and thought combined together. The British, with the impetus of such a massive war, could well have pushed on. And if the Brits then have nuclear weapons first and use it to end World War II, it gets problematic. I could also see America making a lot of money, as the British would be ordering stuff from American industry massively. But that might then affect American industry quite dramatically as well, because instead of the big order, a big purchaser dictating what the industry is building, being the US Navy, the US Army, Air Corps, etc., and them being number one partner, the person making writing the big checks for orders and requesting stuff and writing the specifications to be the British. So the American armed forces might find that their equipment is all being orientated around British requirements. It's an it would honestly, it's the sort of thing which I was going to work out. I would want to be sat down with some very good historians from pretty much every group in every nation involved in World War II, and have a very long discussion. We'd be talking about sitting there chatting away for about a week to work it through. But yeah, nothing is that simple. Lots of people's suggestions of what hot tub history should actually be called, or hot tub historian should actually be called. Hot tub history is a good one, but hot tub historian. And before anyone asks, to wind up my ex-girlfriend and my mum, I do have an OnlyFans account. It has never been used, but I did have it set up because I did an account to wind them up, called the Naked Nail Historian, and no, nothing is ever going on there because my mum would kill me. But I set that up a few years ago. I was winding them up. I was actually setting up Patreon at the time, but I set up an OF account as well. Juicy Sushi. So if you cancel the Didos and just spam tribal clones and crown colonies, how many tribals, this is on the 4.7 inch rather than 4.5 inch for dual pose, how many tribals could you build? An RM with 100 tribals to play with has an interesting change in available forces in certain theatres. Also, with high angle 4.7s, do you have a strong army to ditch the 5.25 program and have some ships available sooner? You probably do, for commonality and logistics reasons, have an argument to ditch the 5.25 program. And if you're not building the Didos because you're spamming tribals and crown colonies, and they're all armed with these 4.7s instead of 4 inches and the 4.7s they do have, how many tribals could you build? If you set up a scenario in 1936 and you just go, we're just going to spam these, you're probably talking about pre-World War II churning out about 9 to 10 a year, because that's how much the Treasury would pay for. Maybe they pay for more. Maybe they give you the budget to get more. Maybe you're getting a full float. You're getting a full. Well, a 9 to 10 is about a flotilla a year. So you're getting, let's say you're getting a flotilla of 9 a year, and maybe they say, well, actually, 1938, 39, we'll have 2 flotillas delivered. So you get 36, 9, 37, 9, 38, 18, 39, 18, and then you go into war spam, and you're building whatever you can, and probably that goes up to about another 27. You could have. And if you're building them sort of Didos that you can suddenly justify the extra ones. So 9, 9, 9, 18, 18. So that's 3 18s before 1939 sort of starts war. You've got 54 in service. 54 tribals with 4.7 inch dual purpose. 4 of them. 4 twin 4. Is a scary amount of destroyers to think about. And also, because you've been focusing on crown colonies, you've probably got more of those in service. And so you've got tribals, you've got them, you've retrofitted other ships with a 4.7 dual purpose, which gives them a slightly heavier hitting in terms of against the rather than the 4 inch, and also gives them a slightly heavier capability for fights with enemy destroyers, torpedo boats. It could be interesting. It could be interesting. Especially as you have to remember, this would also lead to an adjustment in fire control technology. which I did talk about. Nathan Oaken made some excellent comments, and I did respond to them. And then he commented on the comment response, and I responded to that comment. And really, really interesting comments. And it was a case of, I think, to an extent, there is a bit of a, because of the two nations separated by a common language in terms of the American and American English versus the British English, and the phraseology the British use around things. There were some things going on there which were interesting. But I would say the point I would make: British fire control system is built around the British weaponry that is available. And if you have this dual-purpose 4.7-inch coming as a standard one, they do have various systems which can be used. I think, yeah, it's. Sometimes I do wish I did allow myself to do comment response videos, but I don't, because that is, as I said before in other videos, too meta for me. Doing trap. I agree 100% with the 80-degree 4.7-inch replacing a 4.5-inch, but would have kept the 4-inch but L50 instead of L45. The 4-inch gave a higher rate of fire, which would benefit cruisers more, but I would not develop the 5.25-inch giving King George V class and Dido the 4.7-inch L45 or anything, or lengthen the barrel to L50 in a larger twin turret than the destroyers. Could the War Emergency destroyers take twin turrets, or would they still need single turrets but in 8 degrees? That's... the thing is, you'd probably have to design your ships to take the twin turrets. So you'd have to work that out somehow. So they're probably the Cs would be, the War Emergency destroyers will be slightly fatter. Which might be maybe slightly longer or slightly bigger overall, but not that much difference. Toddweb. Also, anything pulled in for AA refit would also get some fire control and armor upgrades while it's in dry dock for its AA upgrades. Pretty sure Hood with a nice refit makes for a different Denmark Strait battle. Potentially. You douche. Really? That's your handle? When talking about difference rate of fire between a 4.7 and 4.5, you mentioned the difference was about 1 round per minute, which in a 20-minute engagement would only equate to 20 rounds difference. If you times that by number of guns on a 6-gun destroyer, you now have a difference of 120 rounds. That does sound like it could make a difference. But the 4.7-inch gun delivers a bigger punch, slightly longer range, you've developed at the same time as the 4.5 inches, and also you're thinking that that they're going to maintain that rate of fire, roughly, at peaks the whole time. And it's actually easier to maintain the 4.7-inch rate of fire at its full peak than the 4.5-inch, because it's not an automated system, it's a human-loaded system. So, because it's slightly slower. Even though it's heavy, it's slightly slower. So, it's a case of you are right, but it's not going to be as much of a differential as you put in. In fact, probably maximum in those 20 minutes is probably going to be about 60 rounds different. And then you've got the fact the 4.7-inch is going to hit harder at longer range with more explosive. Especially if it's upgraded at the same time as the 4.5-inch. And in fact, there are some interesting options there. There are some interesting options. But yeah, broadly speaking, you're right, but also you're not completely right, because the reality is that they had these other figures which are given up as this is how many rounds per minute they can do. If everything's working fine and everyone's fully rested and everyone's going from a start, if you've been keeping up for 10 minutes, no one's going to be going as fast. And also then you have the reality with ships and rounds per minute is, of course, the ship is moving, figures are going up, and they fire as fast as they can. But there is the rounds per minute which are achieved in a nice mount positioned, looking over the sea on a cliffside, firing it, and everyone's going, yes, this is a rounds per minute of this mount. It's brilliant. And then we're on the boat, the actual ship, it's moving, it's rolling, we're trying to target the enemy, we're not just randomly firing into midair, Yeah. Nelson 1995, you seem to have an issue lip sync. In theory, it shouldn't be, because the mic is a USB, and it's all synced, as I've said before. Mic. Camera. So far, new camera hasn't arrived yet. It's ordered, but not arrived yet. It was actually ordered after Christmas. Hopefully Amazon don't refund me the money and then I have to order it again. In theory, it shouldn't be because my USB is all synced, but if there's a specific time point you see it, please say and I'll figure out if it's the original or just the upload. Thanks for the comment. That's on a Nelson 1925 class, the story of Britain's Washington Treaty battleships. So no hassle, about 2:15, it's notable. 2:49, the word source is pronounced with the mouth closed. Perhaps you're a closet ventriloquist? Ventriloquist? There are some options about using a ventriloquist, really there are. It is quite hostile, because, you know, we can all work a very minimal movement. Minimal. You know, what do you think? Ventriloquist? You think I'm a ventriloquist? Does it work? What do you think? Ventriloquist? Yeah? Perhaps I should get a nice little toy and start doing this. Anyway. There is a problem that sometimes my mouth doesn't move as much because I tend to speak with the back of my throat and this part rather than the lips movement. Again, because I'm a lecturer and I have to remind myself not to go into lecturing voice. Because if I constantly speak at this point, which is what I lecture in, hello everyone, how are you doing? Gets a bit loud for everyone listening. So, I tend to try and modulate down a bit. A bit. Real question, post-Suez, and this is on the Soviet Navy 1939 to 65. Brits were never going to keep Vanguard around. The British abandoned Mahan and Corbett in favour of a continental power approach to war. I don't see a random Soviet ship or two changing that. It depends. That's if the Soviets actually have some battleships around. The thing is, the British abandon it because there's no other game in town. The only game in town for Britain to play is the Central Front, because that's the big political game. If, however, the Soviets have a major navy, and the Brits can play the naval game rather than land warfare game, that's cheaper for Britain. Britain goes for the methodology which is going to give it the most advantage when it comes to the political negotiating table. And in the Cold War era, that becomes the Central Front, and if you're committed to Central Front, you're a major power and you have political power in NATO, etc. If you're not, you're not. Because that is the only game in town. If the Soviet Navy is at the beginning of the Cold War, if the Soviet Navy, though, is a major blue water navy, which is poses a big risk to the northern sections and all things, then Britain has the case to make, well, we're a leading naval power, we've got all the infrastructure industry anyway, we will focus on that, we'll provide some high-end units, i.e. an armoured division, etc., to the Central Front to protect that, etc. But, yeah, otherwise, we are, you know, it's very much on you guys. We'll provide an armoured division, maybe a few brigades of artillery, etc. And we'll do the naval fighting, which would allow the British to keep their traditional pattern, and also would allow Britain to keep a lot more money in the UK, rather than building huge bases and facilities in Germany, which they would have liked to have done. HMS Repulse is on a 60 seconds video. HMS Repulse is the second warship of the battle fleet to get a major reconstruction, so it was before the decision was taken to look at re-engineering, replacing fire control, upping the max elevation of the main guns. Also too early for the 4.5 inch, but she got two twin experimental 4 inch between deck mounts, which turned out to be bad enough they removed them in 1938. It's a shame they didn't. didn't use that refit to replace the triple 4-inch and single 4-inch with 4-inch twin high-angle, low-angle mounts. My count gives 17, 3 by 3, 3 triples and 6 singles, versus 18, 9 twins. Still, she got some worthwhile deck protection upgrades. It needed to have a secondary to engage destroyers. If a dual-purpose twin 4x7 or 4-inch capable of doing -10 to +80, I think that she might have been upgraded, but the 4-inch high angle was not enough stopping power for a battlecruiser's secondaries. John Evans, the 4-inch 45 quick-firing Mark 16 high-angle Mark 19 mounting fires a slightly heavier shell, a little faster than the 4-inch 45 breech-loading Mark 9 carried in the T1 triples, or the 4-inch 45 quick-firing Mark 5 single high-angle Mark 3 that she actually carried. Yeah, ideally I'd want something a bit heavier, but switching to the 4.5-inch would be significantly more complex. Just if she is to continue to be armed with 4-inch, I would want the whole battery to be capable of 8-inch aircraft. Maybe transition for separate ammunition would be more complex than I have. Jonas, maybe the transition for separate ammunition would be more complex than I've allowed for, but for turn round times Phaedra's hood, getting the 4-inch 45 Mark 16 high-angle, low-angle Mark 19 twins seems fairly brief. It's possible, but and this is the problem. It's possible with what you're suggesting, if you have the mounts available. But it's also the fact is, what are they looked at on operating? Where is Hood looking to be operating? Where is Repulse looked to be operating at? And that affects what secondaries you're going to fit in. One of the interesting things about Renown, especially, and her upgrade, and that's what I tend to go with in terms of model of what I think HMS Repulse would have looked like by about the time she ends up in World War II, if she'd been properly roofed. She has 10 twin 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns. That gives her a lot of capability when it comes to fighting things. And yes, unfortunately, this was a major reconstruction. Again, it's one of those scenarios where the British government, if they'd invested just a little bit more money, could have found themselves with a vastly better fleet in World War II. But interesting, of course, note is that the Prime Ministers who were deciding how much money to invest in the Navy and in the armed forces weren't the Prime Ministers in charge, of course, when World War II happened. So it wasn't they. Well, it's never blamed on them. But actually, for many of the issues that you can look at in World War II for the Royal Navy, etc., you have to go to the government of Stanley Baldwin, which was very worried about spending too much money on equipment which wasn't going to be of use in a war in 1942-45, which negated the thing of what happens if the war started earlier. No one seems to have come up with that question and gotten a point about it. Well, no one else is going to be ready, so why would war start before then? Because wars have never started before everyone's been ready, have they? So yeah, there is some very bad strategic decision making there, but basically, in my world view, Repulse and Renown should have been upgraded at the same time, and probably at least another Queen Elizabeth class should have been upgraded. If ideally, if you'd had at least Repulse and Renown both upgraded earlier on in the war, earlier on before World War II began, and properly upgraded with their full dual purpose, you'd have been in a far better position. And honestly, Repulse might have actually survived 4C, if she especially had been handled the same, because she comes very close to surviving. Give her slightly more firepower, and she does well. And she probably would have had better air defense, etc. Because they're against Bettys and Nells, and they're manoeuvrable, but they're at their maximum extent of their range, and they're running low of fuel, and there's only so much they can do. But there again, give them a small carrier and they're fine. Wake Island got a comment. Christopher, at first pass, Wake looks valuable to the USN, especially with the Pan Am facilities as a base for reconnaissance of seaplanes. However, second pass shows it's almost valueless. The USN just doesn't operate a seaplane with a round trip range long enough to get to the home islands, Guam, the Philippines Act. Its only value is forcing a strike like the 7th Pearl Harbor attack to take a longer route to avoid potentially being spotted from the island. Chapette. Wrong. World War I starts because the French are sore losers. Honestly, at a certain point, you have to admit, the war, we can talk about lots of factors which can lead to war, lots of factors can fruit war, but usually I go by war starts when someone actually crosses into someone else's territory, when someone crosses a border. You can have people staring across each other on the borders. That's not a war. That's a Cold War. That's a threatening scenario. But until someone actually fires a gun, or actually, these days, or crosses a border, there is not a war. Until someone declares war, there is not a war. So, ultimately, the blame for any war starting goes to the person who crossed the border first. And now we're onto the Sackville video question comments. JDP19, hooray for the Canadians. Killing you politely if you declare war. Do not declare war on the Canadians. So far, look through the Canadian history of fighting wars. They have been disturbingly successful for a nice nation. For such a nice nation. For a nation which has a reputation for being so kind and so friendly, they really do have a habit of winning them. Not French Canada, they got kind of beaten and taken over by English-speaking Canada. But, you know, the rest of Canada, the combined Canada has won disturbingly a lot. For a nation which is considered so peaceful. And then someone very nicely put in a section about Sackville's life and a video about that. And I'll link to that in the comments. And my response to that, I have to admit, was thank you. I ended up cutting loads to make it down to 2 hours and to do everything try to do everything that was mentioned justice. So that bit kind of got edited out. So you've got Scotch boilers, very similar to most locomotive boilers. So as you said, Alex, many places that could make and repair locomotives could repair one of the boilers for these great ships. Definitely. But if I went into all that, I'd have got sidetracked and the video would have been 4 hours long. I know my weaknesses. Yes, once I get into locomotive boilers, then I can do two things. I can talk about steam trains as well as engines. For Chicago, Kelsey, considering the fact that Alex is making a 5-video, 12-hour set on the fly, it shows considerable self-restraint. You have no idea. You have no idea. The first version of slides had something like 112 slides in them. I cut it down. Bill Humphries, no, it's not noisy compared to a diesel. The FD fan is likely to have been most noise rendered. As I heavily said on batteries, they're annoyingly quiet if they weren't moving that much. Phil Humphries, no, we said 1065 to 107, referring to triple expansions, they are a very quiet propulsion system compared to a diesel engine. Sorry, in the earlier response I thought you were talking about submarines, because that's where I discuss things in reference to diesel engines. I want to point out, went to the point you gave me, and again, I don't mention diesel there. I say triple expansion engines were noisy. I have checked. I make no reference to diesel or anything else. A triple expansion engine is not quiet. You can make the case in reference to something else, but that doesn't make it quiet, just less noisy than that other thing. And if you were in the engine room with that engine going, there is no way you wouldn't know it was going. A good example of this is, and I've put a link in this comment to a video which has beautiful examples of beautiful, view of the triple expansion engines going, and the noises the engines make. Yes, I agree, it's not as loud as diesel at the time, but it's not quiet. 20 trucks a day. The paddle ship Waverley was not especially noisy in engine room compared to the paddles thrashing. The big pistons were very smooth and steady. Yes, but again, you put it not especially noisy in engine room compared to the paddles. That still doesn't make them quiet. It makes it less noisy than the other noisier thing. It's like when I had a Subaru, and I hopefully will have another one again someday, they purr when you just started them up and they're just sort of going along. That's far quieter than when you go to full revs. But it's still noisier than a Tesla. Or me just sitting there chatting away next to it. At least mine was, but it had a fun exhaust. I will put a link to the triple expansion video in the description below this one. Ball from Chicago. The coasties demand celerity, action, brisk, haste, intensity, might, hurt, and prudent. Shene, US Coast Guard cutters and craft World War II, Naval Industry Press. There were also a bunch of other ships that ostensibly belonged to the Navy. Never quite understood how that worked. And I've heard it was said that the absolute first Allied ship into Tokyo Bay had a Coast Guard crew, getting there before the minesweepers. The coasties were there to do surveying, but I've never been able to verify that. Generic Person X. Paul Go. If you mean the ships the US Navy operated from early 1942 to war's end, it seems very simple. The US Navy had a shortage of ASW vessels in early 1942, with most of the ships ordered by the US Navy before the attack on Pearl Harbor not yet ready for service, so the British sent some of their own completed flowers over to the US Navy to keep the US Navy sailors working while the US ships were completed. Britain always had a shortage of sailors at all skill levels throughout the war. No. Okay, it's one of those things that goes around. People always going, there's a shortage of sailors. No. Britain tended to have a geographical issue in that it would have sailors in places, and some places, not enough sailors in other places, which leads to people going, there are a shortage of sailors. And the Royal Navy was going, no, just, it's how do we get the sailors from A to B to use them? And the most efficient way to use them is to put them on a ship to take them out there. But then if they take a ship out there, then we have that ship crewed, and we still don't have the sailors out there for the ships out there, because they were deployed out there on their peacetime strength, not their wartime strength. And it gets all sorts of issues. The Royal Navy, yes, the Royal Navy would always like more personnel and would like to man more ships. But I have a problem with sometimes people saying there's always a shortage of sailors, because there isn't. There isn't always enough sailors to do the task. It's required that they want. When I say the task, there isn't sometimes always enough sailors for what people would like to do. But there's always enough sailors and personnel for what people want to do. And one of the reasons is that the British have all the Commonwealth navies, all those things, and this then does tend to feature in that sometimes the phraseology that goes around is the British go, oh yes, please man these destroyers and crew these destroyers so that, because we have a shortage of sailors. Which then provides the governments at home a reason for, we are taking on these destroyers because they have a shortage. But you sit there and go, hang on, those destroyers were just in service. Oh, you've got some new destroyers coming in, and you want the old ones to still be in use, so you are giving them a... Oh, okay. It gets quite complicated, but also fundamentally, I don't think you're using it this way, but fundamentally the shortage angle is often overstated quite heavily. And it there are real shortages. There are times at point where the Royal Navy really is short of personnel. It doesn't have a person on the right place at the right time. But it's not a whole war thing. Bill Humphries, thankfully there was no insulation in engine room, boiler or machinery space, which there would have been when originally built. Yes, and probably would have been asbestos based, which was would have meant I'd have had to wear more protective gear had I been there. Portugal, were the Flower class of World War II descendants of the Flower class soups in World War One, or the trawlers that were developed by the Admiralty? I thought the World War One Flower class more closely resembled later minesweepers than what ended up being true sloops. Basically, someone took the trawlers from World War One and upsized them to the needs of World War Two. This is the point. Hopefully the whole thing explains it in terms of the video. In conception, role and duty, they were descendants of the sloops. In industrial basis, them and the trawlers, the Royal Navy called up and built for World War II, definitely followed the trawlers. But the Flower class soups were not exactly early in World War One and comprised nearly 120 vessels, so it does fit the pattern. Dan Haas. I've always loved the Flower class. It's probably their fishing whaler. And the only reason I'm quite so hot on this is because the amount of times I have had quite senior historians, not usually British, but sometimes British, tell me, oh, they're based on fishing boats. And yeah, but no, a fishing boat is a small vessel. There's actual specific names of these vessels. I know, to some historians, I find it interesting sometimes when I'm doing something. There's one historian particularly who will get absolutely annoyed with you if you are talking about armoured vehicles and you call them all tanks. Which I agree with. They're not. Not all armoured vehicles are tanks. However, at the same point, we'll turn around and use we'll say something's based on a fishing boat when it's based on a whaler, which is a form of fishing ship. There are certain points at which a boat is defined as a certain type of vessel in terms of a fishing boat, and then they get larger and they become certain types of things, and they become into ship categories. And and then we'll go up and we go, oh well, that's all their battleships, and it's the case. No, that's a destroyer, that's a frigate, that's a. So yeah, I'm a bit had fun this week with that one. There's something about their design, their lines, and superstructure that just screams North Atlantic to me. They're the sort of vessel that seems most at home, anchored in the small port towns and cities of Eastern Canada, Ireland, Scotland, Scandinavia, Greenland, Iceland. There's a certain ambience about them. True. And Sackville is a great one to visit. Please go to Halifax, see her, she's glorious. Dogson, thank you for not filming this from a hot tub. That was on the HMCS Pulse in 60 seconds. Yeah, great. There was some excellent footage you got with you on the trip. I like how you had the drone and AA mount interaction. This is the first time I've seen that kind of thing. It gets... there were various comments that there's actually more drone gun interaction, but I have left that for the gentleman who has the drone footage to go into, because I think that'd be most fun. So hopefully you'll see that on Drax channel. Jim McLennards, thank you for the deep dive into the ship that I love. It has been my absolute favourite class class of any ship I read about. Since meeting you in Jack Halifax, I've patiently waited for this. I kind of wish you would have told the story about the ferry and the pom-pom. Things that got cut to get in 2 hours. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm fairly sure the ferry story will make an appearance at some point. Yes. You will see. I think it will be on Direct Channel. And again, these engines, they are lovely, but I don't know. Some of the later ones, some of the ones sort of more modern ones have got fairly quieter, but especially the engines at the time, and the ones fitted in the Sackvilles and Flower class were not. This is on the Battle of the Plate, the Brock. It's not like the Royal Navy didn't have a few hundred years of experience in chasing down raiders or anything like that. Escanatarab on the flower class. What's the illustration on the side of the gun housing? Pirate hat, sword, and pistol. He seems to be riding a shark, which was a... Well, he is riding a shark, I think. I'm not sure if it's a... It looks like a rooster or something. I have honestly not much idea. That's as good as I can get the picture. If we go back... Yeah, he's riding a shark. It looks like a human-ized rooster who's got something, and something above the shark as well. And is that a pistol or a horn or something? It's very interesting art. And there's smoke coming out the back. That's just cool. I have no idea what it is. I have absolutely no idea for what it is, but it looks cool. And so I think it's a chicken or rotor. I'm not 100% sure from photos. 20 trucks a day. The sailor is going to jump on the Nazi foul, like boarding an enemy ship and the submarines are foul. He's riding a hunter-killer of the seas. It's something. It's open to interpretation. We'll go back again so you can see it and expand it again. Try and figure out. That does seem to be something. Well, I don't think it's a Nazi foul because it looks like it's just a stick of dynamite with legs, or is that a periscope with legs? I don't know. Marx Ferensonium. The Great Mysteries of Exeter. Going from excellent gunnery to ineffective despite being upgraded in anti-radar. Surviving 11-inch battery and then being knocked out by a British 18-inch shell fired by the Japanese. It's not a mystery. A very worked up and capable crew is dispersed to other ships after a victory, requiring a major service. Then later on, a new crew, still working up to the capability, find themselves rather in a space which would allow them find themselves in a war zone. And, well, life sadly happens. And that is it. You have a very well worked up crew. You versus a crew which is relatively recently brought together. Dejin Gavrovic. Was the Flower Class 4-inch gun dual purpose? Not really. It doesn't have the range of movement to engage aircraft. It doesn't really go high enough. Dejin Gavrovic. Can you make a video about World War I Flower Class as well? There is almost no information about them on the internet. I then put a link to a video where I had discussed World War I Flower Class. Another one. Christopher, the people who complain about the flowers not being good enough show a lack of understanding of the basic math of convoy war. Every submarine that's kept down and can't charge its batteries and thus loses contact with the convoy. Every time a U-boat is forced to take a marginal shot, or better yet, not take a shot at all, because there's a flower class there, being awkward is a win. That flower class can be there because it's not the best. It's the minimal viable product which allows it to be ubiquitous, and thus foil more attacks than a better ship with a higher probability of kill that cannot possibly match the production reliability and service rate of the flowers. Because of the rules of the game, and what actually constitutes a win, the flowers are the perfect solution precisely because they're just good enough. Yeah, agreed. Dan Sharadsky, this is on the Soviet Navy 1939 to 65. 1939 to 65. That poor R-class battleship. A better fate would have been transferred to the Polish Navy if 5,000 more personnel managed to escape to Britain. Then she'd get a magical speed boost by being fed Polish vodka instead of fuel oil, and manage to reach 30 knots to take Rodney and Warspite on tow and go after Bismarck. When the rest of the British fleet show up, all that's left is a smoking mangled carcass, and the demonic trio just asks, "What took you so long?" I love the spirit. I doubt even with Polish vodka they'd get an R-class to 30 knots. Maybe they could get it to 25. Maybe. With a lot of work. Student Aviator. This was a question on my Space Marine Army update. Which I've got the paper glue now. I need to start actually building. Would you ever do a Warhammer Naval Lore? Maybe how you would see different ships acting. For example, they have battleships, battle cruisers, and ground cruisers and cruisers. currently, 6th of June is currently penciled in for Fleet of the Imperium, Warhammer 40k. Mainly because I can do that as a fleet analysis. But it's going to be interesting, and I'm going to have to get some models. Any recommendations for where I can get good models of the different classes, please send me a note, because currently I've been looking at them and they're all very expensive. And I don't mind if it costs money. I am a Warhammer fan, after all. I'm used to the concept of it costing money, and a lot of money. But I am also conscious of the amount of money I spend on putting together a video. It's going to sound strange of, am I going to use those for things other than that video? So that's what I have to find models which I can use for other things as well. Well, there again. Hopefully by then I'm over 10,000 subscribers, and, well, the differential should be quite good for videos, apparently, because once you break that figure, it does apparently, YouTube does give you a slight boost. Nakakuch. What is the weight difference between a 4.7-inch dual-purpose and an old-style 4.7-inch, or between a 4.7-inch dual-purpose and a 4-inch? Don't forget, the treaty restrictions impose weight limits. So some ships may have to make trade-offs. Take the Belfast, for example. If you switch from 4-inch to 4.7-inch, the extra weight has to be found from somewhere. So that, what do you trade off? Lose armor, reduce machinery, giving lower speed, especially for a ship like the Crown Colonies. They're already on the edge weight-wise. There may be a case for some classes to forgo the 4.7 dual purpose and stay with 4-inch, so they can make better use of the weight elsewhere. Okay. So. Interesting point. And I do agree there are displacement limits. Please note the use of the word. However, with the 4.7 versus the 4.7 dual purpose versus the 4-inch, there would be a small weight increase. I'm not going to lie and say there isn't, or try and pretend there wouldn't be. However, in terms of a ship of this size we're talking single digit, possibly half tons difference in terms of overall everything else. So I would say probably you'd be talking about 8 tons overall. Now, let's go to the Crown Colonies. Let's go to the actual Crown Colony class. Let me make sure I have their stats. For a Fiji, they have 4 quick-firing twin 4-inch mounts. So, if you change those to dual-purpose 4.7-inch, you are probably going to add maximum 10 tons onto it. They are 8,670 tons in standard. That would take them up to 8,680 tons. I don't think it's going to cause much of a problem. I don't think, as far as the Royal Navy is concerned, in terms of... Now, once you get down to destroyers, etc., that's where those tonnages start to make a difference. But once you're dealing with something which is measured in 8,000 tons, 8,500 tons plus, 10 tons more is something to think about, especially in terms of top weight and where they're positioned. But it's also not going to be horrendously of an issue. But I can see where you come from. Interesting point. Calypso class. Shame you can't hold a course on this. Your understanding of this subject is impeccable. That's David Newton's response from Area 51. David Newton, what do you think these videos are? De facto, they are exactly that. They are a lecture, or in the case of the Soviet Navy, or what the various naval, or what the various could do. Various naval powers in World War II do is a series of lectures, and that is actually how I approach it. My view is always the live I consider sort of like a seminar. Although I am considering doing Discord things, which could be closer to a seminar, because people can talk back more easily than just in the chat. So I'm thinking about that. The recorded video is a lecture. And comment response videos, I hope you don't mind, but I kind of treat them like I would tutorial feedback. That's how I approach it. So this is, to an extent, slightly different, because I'm just like this and chatting away, and I'm wearing a hat because I haven't turned the heater on in my office. I was wondering why I was cold, but also why my head was hot, and I'm wearing a hat, and I haven't turned the heater on in my office. That explains. Oh, God help me. All right. Oh, now I've got hat hair. Oh, well. Right. But yeah, so that's what I sort of view these things as. I think I'll put the hat back on. It's less embarrassing. Good Lord. Yeah. I need to start using the caffeine stuff or whatever. One of my best friends, she keeps telling me, use the caffeine shampoo to help your hair. And I'm going, it's fine. It's still hair up there. When the hair's gone and I look like my grandfather, well, then the brain will just emerge. Calypso class. I've often wondered about a Heligoland decision. Thanks for bringing it up. Pleasure. And again for the Calypso class. I have to watch this again. My uncle thinks that I am watching something. He needs to have my uncle thinks when I'm watching something, he needs to have a conversation with me. Yeah, it's nice when uncles want to have a chat with you. It's kind of ventilation tube. Turbine. Ventilation turbine. Was that the original equipment, or was it added later? Interesting that they were around in the 1940s. It's mostly original. Most of the stuff is original now. On the Sackville, there were some stuff added later in the 1940s, but most of the stuff there is fairly original. Down torpedoes. But where are they? We have many methods of letting air out, but nothing to let water in. That was on the... so the Year of Design Technology has some gaps, and I was wondering what that's the comment page is still up, and of course, next... Well, if this comes out on Monday as planned, then tomorrow's video is going to be the first one of the suggested topics for that. Yeah, and it's going to be on Admiral class and Lexington class. If both classes are fully completed, half as battle cruisers, half as carriers. Goes, third option for the bad breach. Gun goes bang normally, but you cannot open the breach after it. About ever. Yep. That is the third option. Ooh. Mike Carollo on Winchester. Winchester is an interesting international transitional design. Heavy light cruiser, or is it a light heavy cruiser? And as Rapid Razor put, it's a light cruiser plus heavy cruiser equals medium cruiser. Basically, they took a light cruiser shaped hull, but then they made it into a heavy cruiser. And they put heavy cruiser guns on it, and they did also modify the armor and the armor layout, so it is a heavy cruiser. That is why I have it up as the greatest treaty 8-inch current cruiser. Because, yeah, USS Wichita. We love her. She is beautiful. Also in Wichita, Admiral Tiberius. I once proposed the idea to Drac about the Atlanta class built on a Wichita hull. So basically 14 to 18 5-inch guns, as well as 2-core torpedo launchers plus actual armor that can protect a ship. Joseph Askins, have you gone mad? That sounds absolutely terrifying. I love it. Well, you sort of do too. Admiral Tiberius. Triple stacked 5-inch dual mounts, fore and aft, with 2 wing mounts on either side. It sounds absolutely amazing. Joseph Askins, USN designers, how many 5-inch 38s do you want on it? US Navy fleet, yes. GD Hunt, sort of USS Worcester class, but with reliable proven guns. Could have been put to sea early enough to fight kamikazes. It would have been available for the start of war, as Tiberius puts. And then Hugh Fisher, that is very close to the French Colbert de Grasse completed just after World War II. What Atlanta dreams of growing up to be. Tiberius, it would have been a much more useful ship for sure. Blue Marlin 81. Now make it a Baltimore class, but stacked with 5-inch 54s. Howard Caffrey. A Brooklyn had 15 rapid-fire 6-inch guns. Cleveland had 12. Even more rapid-fire 6-inch guns, plus 5-inch 38s, plus armour, and about equal to battle-mods. Are they heavy light cruisers, or light shell-spam heavy cruisers? That's an interesting question. What I would say is that US Navy cruisers, as a whole, and this was an interesting thing to do in the conclusion, are a well-developed force. They go through years of indecision, and then by the time sort of 1939 sort of point, the US Navy has worked out what it wants for its cruisers, and it's building them. Now, you also have to remember, whilst 8 inches, of course, bigger, so that must be better, there is the point which led to the Towns, the Clevelands, and other vessels, with the and Brooklyns, with all the spamming 6-inch guns, that there's only so much armour you can put on a hull. And there's only so much protection you can put in. And the more and more you rely on fire control, which is not stuff in the turret, with someone just peeking out a little hole going, I see them, they're right in front of us, fire! But it's actually something along the lines of, right then, we see them at long range, we need to compute this directory, do this, and have to rely on that information being taken in and fed to some computer system. It's a mechanical computer, but some sort of computerized system, and using that to then provide the accurate information to the guns. The more and more you have exposed bits which you cannot armor, and which can be taken out. And when they're taken out, you become blind, deaf, and dumb. And you can be the greatest boxer in the world, but if you have blood in both your eyes, your ears have been cauliflowered to the point at which they're not hearing anything, you will not be able to win a fight. The other person might not be as good a boxer as you, they might be lighter, but they manage to inflict enough damage on your points of visual, on your ability to fight, that you cannot fight back accurately. You will flail around, and you might connect. You might even knock them out if you're very lucky. But in a boxing match, they're having to get within arm's range of you, and that means you are within arm's range of them to hit you and to take you down. Ships don't have to do that. So, if you've lost your ability to visually identify me at long range, but I'm still at my good effective combat range of, let's say, 18,000 yards, and I still have my ability to range on you because I've been spamming you with 6-inch shells, and you've been trying to hit me with the occasional 8-inch shell in comparison, I win. Because I can keep taking you down, or I can close and get into torpedo range. And I can lop some torpedoes off and go, bye-bye. That's the point. That's what it's about. Right then, so I will once again, we have reached the Wichita video. And I will print screen. So it's been saved. And I'll say thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And as I said, this one should go up on Monday. Take care.